Bus driver ignores 6-year-old girl begging for help. Sees her in his house that evening. Jonathan was working his bus route when a little girl hopped on the bus desperately asking for help. But he didn't have time to help as he had to keep working, and despite her pleas, the other passengers ignored her too, so the girl went away. But when Jonathan got home that night, something shocking happened. "Please, someone please help my mother," a little girl yelled when she jumped on Jonathan's bus. He had arrived at a bus stop on his route in New Jersey and no one else had entered his vehicle. He was startled and frowned at the girl. "What?" "My mom needs help, please help me," the girl begged, and Jonathan looked around his bus. Other passengers were looking at the girl somewhat worried, but others were ignoring her completely. "Listen, girl, I don't have time to help you. Call 911, he finally said to the kid who was crying at that point. "Please, my mom," the girl insisted, her tears falling freely from her eyes. Finally, Jonathan got up from his driver's seat and pushed the little girl out of his bus. "I'm sorry, but I need to keep going. You can call 911, just ask someone for a phone," he said more forcefully as he got her out of the bus. "There's no one around," the little girl protested, and her big wet eyes were heartbreaking, but they weren't enough to make Jonathan stop working. He wanted to get home early that night and rest. "Surely you'll find someone," he stated finally and closed the bus door to resume driving. That night he arrived home and greeted his wife Caroline as he walked through the door. "I'm home," he called out. "Oh honey, thank God you're here. We've had the craziest day. I wanted to call you, but I didn't want to interrupt your work," she told him after kissing him. But then Jonathan froze. The little girl from earlier was sitting on his living room couch and staring at him with big eyes. "Who is that? What is she doing here?" he demanded his wife, but Caroline didn't recognize her husband's demeanor or shock. "That's what I have to tell you. I was walking back home when I saw this beautiful girl Susie crying for help. I had to do something. She wanted to borrow my phone to call 911. Then she took me with her a few steps away and there was her mom on the side of the road completely unconscious. Can you believe it? I called 911 myself," Caroline explained. "Susie was so brave to ask around for help." Jonathan felt horrible, realizing that the little girl had begged him for help for her mother and he had turned her away so easily. Everyone else on the bus ignored her too, and he couldn't believe how awful he'd been. "What else happened?" he asked, gulping and sitting opposite Susie on the other couch. Caroline sat by the girl and hugged her dearly. "Well, we rode the ambulance to the hospital. The doctors said that Susie's mom suffered a stroke and they took her to surgery immediately. It was apparently pretty tricky and one of the nurses thanked me for acting so quickly," his wife continued. "But honestly, the bravest and smartest person here is Susie." Caroline looked at the girl with a warm smile, hugging her with one arm tightly to get her point across. "You did amazing, Susie. You saved your mom. She's going to be just fine." Jonathan was still reeling from the shame of his previous actions, but he had another question. "And why are you here? Shouldn't you have stayed in the hospital?" "They told us that visiting hours were strictly implemented, so I offered to take Susie home, but I didn't want her to be alone, so I invited her over. Luckily, she said yes," his wife replied, still smiling with pride at the girl. Finally, Jonathan had to come clean to his wife. "Can I speak to you for a second?" "Of course," she responded, and they went to their bedroom to have a discussion. By the end of it, Caroline was livid. "How could you? Her mother could have died." I know. I'm so ashamed of myself. What can I do?" he lamented, holding his head. "You have to apologize to that little girl right now," Caroline insisted, pointing her finger to the door. It was the right thing to do, so he followed her demands. "Susie, do you remember me?" he started, sitting down to the girl. Susie looked up at him with her big eyes and nodded slowly. Jonathan nodded too. "I want to tell you, Susie, that I'm extremely sorry for my actions earlier today. I should have gotten out of the bus and helped you immediately. Do you think you can forgive me?" Susie smiled slowly and nodded again. "Yes," she said quietly. Thank you so much," he mumbled emotionally, and the child hugged him. She'd probably forgiven him quickly because her mother was fine thanks to Caroline's actions. The next day, they visited Susie's mother and did so every day until she was released from the hospital. The two families eventually became good friends. Meanwhile, Jonathan tried to help people, especially anyone who asked for it whenever he could. He would never make that giant mistake again. He could only thank God that his wife was there to help save Susie's mother.